Hey everyone, Tony D, Little Joan here. Little Joan's under the blanket. Nice and cozy, right, Joan? All right. She's being good, so no one disturb her. So, as you may or may not know, one of my hobbies on Reddit is arguing politics. And I rarely do it these days. It's so polarized now, people are out of their minds. But sometimes I'd like to. Well, I was inspired by Daryl Davis, who is. He's the guy, he's a black jazz musician who has talked a bunch of guys out of being in the Ku Klux Klan. And I saw him at the Minds event that Tim Pool put on, and I thought, maybe I could do that with some of the Antifa guys. So sometimes I engage in little chats on Reddit because they kind of hang out there. And my theory is most of the Antifa guys are just college kids who are caught up in this. They think it's cool. Um, they think they're smart to be a part of it. I don't know any of these guys, but I had some interesting discussions on Reddit about Antifa, so I thought I'd share some of the back and forth. Um, so I don't know who the again. I'm not picking on these guys. Don't go to Reddit and scream at them or anything like that. But so we got into. I had posted. Yeah, I posted this article. Bombshell: Antifa is structured like Islamic terror cell from the National Police Association. It's a bit hyperbolic, I'll admit, but it's true. I mean, and just because you're structured in the same way doesn't mean you have the same ideology. So um, I wrote, so I posted that, and someone put, "No, the hell we are not," objecting to that. I said, "Then how?" And they replied, assuming this guy's an Antifa, who knows? It's whatever. There are a lot of different people with similar ideas who self-organize as people will do when they have common causes. There is no Antifa per se at all. Even the FBI, which is weirdly right-wingy at this time, totally wrong, lists groups and individuals who may call themselves Antifa, not any actual group by that name. Plainly, it's just anti fascist minded people who are sick of what's happening and sick of watching people getting killed for being the wrong color, being intimidated away from voting, being oppressed with wages and endless labors with promises of a retirement that never comes. So you see in that sentence there, he kind of blends in a whole lot as if people are being killed on the streets at random. Well, not at random, for all these like reasons, like we're living in some sort of dystopian future where, you know, the Donald Trump stormtroopers just kill people all the time for all the things he just said, which just isn't true. And he doesn't even mean it that way, but he conflates it all. It's all the same to him. So, yeah, I mean, he's just frustrated with, his own politics, I guess. Continuing, the thing a nationalist or fascist cannot comprehend, and again, he's conflating two terms that are different, is that hierarchies aren't actually necessary for a grouping of people to behave in an apparently structured manner. Here's a great example of that behavior, on both sides, really. The internal memos of Microsoft, who could be called fascist in a sense, everything's fascist to these people, speak of how open source is a threat. They then try to discredit, sow distrust and fear, and generally attempt to stop what they consider a true threat to the dominance they had. And it turns out it was and is. Go and look at GitHub or something similar, and you will find that there is a very widely understood way of doing things, despite nobody having any real control over any project except by agreement. Libertarians talk about this, and that's a society of volunteerism, which is a good thing, but it kind of has its limits in certain things, and but I'll stop interrupting and try to get to the end of this first part. The fact of the matter is that people really don't take well to fascism, and that the powers that be at this time don't seem to understand that. The overall notion is with no justice, there can be no peace. The practical thing then is that until there is justice, peace will be withheld by way of constant protest. There is no funding, no state, no political party in control of this. There is no need for that. This is a natural response to hyper nationalism, terrorism, blatant lies, racism, fascism, and essentially any other tyrannical style of governing. There are some who believe they have a right due to some imposed entitlement to impose themselves on everyone. Naturally, we resist that. It's just human nature to do so. It's why we still exist. So you can see his wording here, like the flow of his speech is just so vague as to mean lots of different things. So you can't it's hard to pin him down on specifics because he thinks, well, this is a natural state of affairs, right? The government gets to authoritarian, I think is what he really means, and then people resist. And that is pretty true, but the question is, are we really all that authoritarian? Have we been more authoritarian now because Trump is in office, or have we been more authoritarian in the past? I remember the Bush era. I think it was much more authoritarian, and in that. But the thing is, the trend during the Bush era was "Yay America," and so I think the sheep, and I would include, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, dude, but I think you're one of the sheep. You would have been caught up in the Bush era like that. You would have been, the first guy up on the fence of the White House when they killed Osama bin Laden during the Obama era. Like, yay! It's people who don't think for themselves. He's pushing collectivism. He thinks just because a lot of people are involved, it'll be good. It'll all work out. And sometimes that happens. And there is a lot of spontaneous volunteerism that can work. And that's what the free market basically is. But it can go disastrously wrong. And he doesn't seem to acknowledge that. And it seems to be this idea that, well, if only we tear down everything, we couldn't possibly have anything bad. And conflating, I think, the nationalists and the fascists as the same thing is really not a great thing at all. And I'm not like a super hardcore nationalist, but, I like America. And just because you're a nationalist doesn't mean you're a fascist at all. Fascism and nationalism are two completely distinct things. They have a little overlap, but they're distinct in that the fascists worship the state, and the nationalists, they just like it. So this was my response. I have many questions. So if Antifa is a grouping of people that to behave in an apparently structured manner, isn't the description of how it behaves no different from a group that does have a hierarchy? I mean, if Antifa can raise an army, let's say, and that army can perform everything a government-formed army can do, and if the only distinction is how it was brought together and run, doesn't Antifa run the same risk of being corrupted? Wouldn't the same overindulgences in violence and oppression eventually plague Antifa? Is having a structure or acting in a structured manner a distinction with a difference? And how can you ensure Antifa doesn't fall prey to bad actors when literally anyone that says they're anti-fascist is automatically welcomed into the group? And he kind of only sort of answers my questions. I was hoping for more specifics, but this is what he, and again, he was very polite. So don't go to Reddit and pester people. He responds, those are pretty good questions, I think. In essence, if a group of people has no specific hierarchy, it can't fall into the specific kind of flaws, which would be of concern in the context. Yeah, I don't know what he means by that sentence. I think what he means is, if the group is spontaneously formed, it can't fall into the same problems that, a battalion and a commune can't have the same problems, basically what he's saying. And that's just not true. there could obviously, and it's happened. I mean, there have been communes. I mean, look at the Manson family. He turned into a despot and ordered his minions to go kill. That was certainly a hippie commune. You couldn't get more communist than the Manson family. Um, and conversely, just because you're in a battalion doesn't mean you can't act with humanity and compassion. There have been many examples of that. But continuing, that said, if any sort of army is to form, it can no longer be without a structure and continue to function, which is why it's a good thing Antifa's purpose is to fight against fascism and not to propose a specific alternative. See, that to me is an interesting sentence, because he's basically freely admit, like, well, we don't have an alternative, but we know this is wrong, so tear it all down. Which isn't a very good thing, because he's assuming that the alternative has to be better. And really, that is where people of a certain age, younger people, just don't understand how bad things have been in the past. This is their lack of understanding of history. They don't understand how awful, things used to be for certain people. I mean, in ancient times, human beings were just, lives were worthless. People could literally, they literally owned you. So he's just, oh no, tear it all down. We'll figure it all out. No, it took a long time to get to where we are today. It seems foolish just to throw that away, just because some people are having some problems and don't want to be bothered to try to work them out. But continuing, although plenty of individuals will certainly have their ideas, Antifa being only a descriptive name for an ideal, not true, absolutely does run a constant risk of at least appearing corrupt through false flaggings. Somebody performing an action under somebody else's banner. This is just naive, in my view. I mean, we've already had Antifa guys who have committed horrible crimes, and they're in the mix. They're not disavowed. We've had bizarre instances and lots of racism coming out of Antifa. So, and this is part of the problem. Somebody else's banner. Which banners are the good banners? We'll never know, because these people just spontaneously, say, "Oh, I'm in Antifa," and then when they do something wrong, it's like, "Oh, that guy wasn't with us." Continuing, one of the major issues with the indulgence in violence and oppression as it stands is that it is designed and even deliberately trained in our current policing and governing system. That's somewhat true. I mean, the state has a monopoly on violence, and libertarians talk about that all the time. But just because you have a monopoly on violence doesn't mean you need to use it, and this is what checks and balances are for. Not all power is oppressive. Continuing, the best way I can describe why it can't exactly fall, is the same reason that people who call themselves Christian can be easily verified. If a person says, "I am Christian," and yet does not care about what Jesus said, they are pretty clearly just claiming to be that. If a person claims to be Antifa and yet is behaving in a fascist manner, it's a false flag. Well, who determines that is the question, right? They have a pretty broad definition of what a fascist is. They pretty much call anybody who disagrees with them, who's not in the group, fascist. So, and they have all these disparate cells that don't communicate with each other. Therefore, that's not easy. That's not an easy thing. You could tell a Christians go to church. They do certain things that are uniform. They belong to Christian religions. I mean, it's pretty easy to check. Are you a Lutheran? Oh, yes, I am. Oh, okay. Now, if you're lying about that, you can press further. Well, what church do you go to? Where do you go? And then you could check with that church. Is this person a member of your congregation? You can't do that with Antifa. There's no checks and balances. There's no metric to check them. You can't call up the local Antifa chapter and say, "Hey, I met Bob from Rose City Antifa. Is he a member?" Like, they're First off, they're not going to answer a phone, and second off, they're not going to confirm anybody's a member because they're constantly up to criminality, in my view. So that's kind of a weird statement, and again, very naive, in my view. So to sum it up, continuing. So to sum it up a bit, when the government becomes fascist, there's a natural pushback because humans do naturally tend to defer to others who are better at things than the person themselves. Each grouping of likely unfamiliar people will still form a natural mini hierarchy. See, on the one hand, he's talking about spontaneous hierarchies or spontaneous sort of volunteerism that just works out, and yet here it is with the hierarchy again. And again, when you're deferring to somebody who's better at, for instance, leading your group, how do you know if that person is leading you in the right direction? So you might have a guy, yeah, he's great, he's the leader of our Antifa cell, and then he leads you into a death trap, or he leads you into a raid on a police station where you get a bunch of weapons and then get gunned down by the cops. I mean, yes, humans do naturally tend to defer to others who are better at things. That's not always the case. That's not always the case at all. People tend to defer to the person who is better at, who's the most willful, who's the better speaker, who has the better presentation. I'll give you a perfect example. I just talked about it the other day. During the Civil War in the United States, the Confederates had the better guns. They had repeating rifles. You could just go blam, blam, blam. The guy who had invented them had offered them to the Union, but Lincoln decided to go with a politically connected gun manufacturer who had a worse gun. A gun that I think was a bolt action where you had to put the bullet in or something like that. It was definitely slower. No, I don't think they had bolt actions. It was something like that, but it was way slower. So you can see that not the best always wins out, because if that were the case, the Union would have had the repeating rifles, and the Civil War would have been much, much shorter. These are continuing. These are easily broken up by any dissent, and so don't have the same effects on the members as the militaristic Nazi cult-like training giving to police officers in a fascist system. Well, look, I've had friends and relatives who have worked as cops, and they do get training, and I'll even go so far as to say they pass around cartoons and things that, yeah, they're a little spicy, and but you know, the idea that yes, we're training cops to murder people, no, that's not the intent. Sometimes that's the end result, like when they tend to pick applicants who are more aggressive, lower IQs, and more readily willing to shoot people. Yes, you're stacking up the reasons why some police officers are not good. They get chosen for the wrong traits. But the idea that, and he links to an example of a police training manual. I don't know how real it is. It's bad, but you know, it's not the norm. I mean, they certainly don't use that training manual in New York or New Jersey. So, you know, I'm sure this is probably the example of one or two training manuals in the United States in obscure districts where I'm sure people were fired up and down. But, and again, as a libertarian, we're constantly complaining about the cops. A lot of it has to do with the erosion of our civil liberties. If we pushed more civil liberties, if people were allowed to open carry everywhere, I guarantee you the cops would be a hell of a lot more polite. They ain't going to pull over everybody when everybody's armed, and they could get in a lot of trouble even for searching your car without a warrant. But because they've made all these exceptions and cops know how to work that, you know, when you get pulled over, you basically got to comply or you could be in trouble. Continuing, to show you what I mean, this is an example of a police training material, which does resemble Islamic extremist training. Well, which is funny, like, he makes that same analogy when, this article made that analogy and everybody's voting it down and upset by it, right? On the other hand, there's no such thing as Antifa training, just rebellion where it is called for. The peace will be restored should justice ever show up. Again, what's the metric for that? And that was the next response to this. He didn't respond to that yet, but there's no metric. There's just a bunch of randos who wear black hoodies who are just mobbing people. Like they're a hive mind. They're not a thinking group that goes, "Oh, we've achieved justice." You'll never achieve justice that way. And keep in mind, back in the Wild West, we had that kind of mob justice, right? We'd hang some guy, maybe get a trial, but it was all local people. And they'd effing hang him, and they'd laugh about it, and it would be entertainment when the guy hung. So, that didn't exactly work out so well for people who were disliked in town and did something, or even didn't do anything. So I wouldn't exactly want to go by mob justice. It's dumb. I've done a video on that. So I think the bigger question to be asked, he continues, is if we do nothing, and here's where he gets all righteous, and allow police to go about murdering and taking a head for an eye, and allow the government in general just to abandon the people without recourse, then what are we? Again, I don't agree with any of that. It's like, what the hell are you talking about, dude? Where are the cops beheading people? Yes, there are excesses in the police force, but Jesus, man. And when we allow the government in general just to abandon its people without recourse, do you understand what the government even is? You're demanding that the government never abandon anyone and get into everybody's life. That's what you are essentially pushing. And what do you do if then you push for that and then the government's bad? Or the government tells you to do something you don't like to do, like it is now. Like go home and get a job. Continuing. This isn't democracy or even capitalism or conservative. It's just Nazism. No, it's not. That's not what it was at all. The bad guys from World War II. I shouldn't have said that. I'll probably get flagged on YouTube. The bad guys from World War II were very specific things with specific ideas and specific horrible things they did, dude. You're comparing apples and oranges and saying, oh, they're the same. They're the same. They're both round, therefore they're the same. Is there overlap? Sure. There's some overlap here and there, but Jesus, man, you wouldn't have survived 10 seconds under that kind of regime. They wouldn't have allowed you freedom of speech. You couldn't walk around and say this stuff and thumb your nose at authority. You'd be put up against the wall, and that would be the end of you. So don't even compare it. It's not even comparable. And as we all know, anybody who invokes that kind of language on the internet instantly loses the argument, and he has. Continuing, and so we can't just stand by and let it be. Not again. Everything's about World War II to people. The questions you have brought up can be best addressed by you. Oh, and anyone else who has any ideas. You ask, what would prevent being corrupted again, and what would prevent the same violence and oppression? And I would point to the ending of World War II and today, and say that we have not figured that one out. Okay. Those with ideas need to make them known, because we're going to need a new world. So this is the kind of person that is behind the black bloc, in my opinion. Naive, college student, like, oh yeah, I got it. We'll just tear everything down and start over. That'll be easy. They just don't understand how long, hard fought it was just to get to this point in history where we have a constitution, where we have rights, where we don't have roaming gangs of criminals just murdering people, where we have a civilization where we can vote and talk and go back and forth like this. they just want to abandon all of that because they think somehow it won't be that bad. if everything's unplugged, the police are gone, and the prison system is gone, then we could start over. No. Then we're going to have cartels running our cities and everywhere. We'll have criminal gangs from coast to coast. They will fill in that vacuum like that. I promise you, and I said this in another video about Minneapolis. The gangs in Minneapolis are having a field day right now because they're cutting back on the police. They've abolished the police. They plan to get rid of them still. And they're just kicking it up. Why wouldn't you? You're cutting back on the cops. They already know where the cops are and where they patrol. The moment you cut back on the cops, they go, hey, now our job's much easier. Now we know we can sell more drugs and do more mayhem and commit more robberies. There is a calculation in the criminal underworld. And you want to reduce the pressure on them to nothing. In which case they will go, all right, let's do this. And they'll take everything. They will take everything from you. And they won't care that you're, went to college and read the Karl Marx or anything like that. It's just going to be, give me your wallet. And you're going to give it to them or you're going to get shot in the face. And you're going to give them anything else they want too. Your car, your house. You're not going to be able to stop these people because you won't have the cops to call. I mean, anybody can talk this way and throw up a big, oh, we're going to get rid of it all and tear it down. But the reality is, if you do tear it down and you get into trouble, what then? Who do you call? Your Antifa buddies aren't going to be around to protect you. You've admitted it yourself that they will disperse into the 5 winds when your mission is accomplished. And then where does the justice come from? The justice will then come from mobs of people getting pissed off and raiding that drug house or whatever and trying to kill everybody in it. And they'll turn around and they'll try to kill everybody back. And the guys with the most guns wins, dummy. So, hate to call you dummy, but man, this is just breathtakingly naive. But it's what I've always suspected from the Antifa crowd. They just don't understand what they're messing with here. They just don't understand that they're tools. Just like Stalin purged the true believers in the early days of the revolution, you guys would have to be purged. Because the moment you'd figure out, wait a minute, you've betrayed the revolution, you'd become their most ardent enemies. And Stalin knew that, and he killed them all. So, useful idiot, please reconsider, I would say, just my opinion, reconsider all this and throw away your hoodie, get out of Black Bloc, get out of this life, read history, educate yourself, and look to do things in a peaceful manner. If you want to make change, there's ways to do it. There are people who have been elected to office, they go to college, they become lawyers, and they change things. They change things through the law. And that's what we are. We're a nation of laws. And through that, we can change things. Through this, you're just going to get a lot of people killed.